When you hand a traditional, single-shot AI model a deep research task with multiple overlapping constraints, its logic often shatters. The model attempts to resolve everything in a single forward pass, and the output fractures into incoherence. This failure exposes a core scientific problem in artificial intelligence: the discovery-verification asymmetry. Generating a novel answer that satisfies a dozen specific constraints simultaneously requires massive computational effort. But checking that work, verifying whether a proposed answer actually meets a given constraint, is highly tractable. It takes far less cognitive load to spot a flaw than it does to invent the perfect solution from scratch. Standard approaches try to brute force deep research simply by searching longer. The model branches out further and further, generating sprawling, linear search trees that eventually degrade into a maze of dead ends and hallucinations. Increasing the search length doesn't solve the core issue. It only increases the volume of unverified data the model must manage. To resolve this, the system must stop adding new branches and instead turn inward, using the efficiency of verification to audit its own reasoning and bridge the gaps in its own evidence. This is AREX. It is a family of agents engineered to exploit the discovery-verification asymmetry through a process called recursive self-improvement. The researchers instantiated AREX in two specific forms to test this architecture: a 4 billion parameter dense model and a 122 billion parameter mixture of experts. AREX treats an initial answer as a living draft to be continuously challenged. The agent produces a result, tests it against the user's constraints, and iterates until the evidence matches the claim. By embedding this verification process natively, AREX suggests the baseline where capability is defined by a systematic, self-auditing architecture rather than raw parameter count alone. To achieve this, the AREX architecture divides the cognitive workload into two distinct interacting processes. First is the inner research loop. This inner loop has a single directive: gather evidence from external sources and construct a provisional answer. Inevitably, parts of this draft will contain unverified or conflicting information. That is where the outer self-improvement loop takes over. Acting as a strict auditor, it sweeps the inner loop's provisional draft. It checks the draft constraint by constraint. Any claim that lacks sufficient evidence is isolated and pulled into an unresolved queue. Once those specific failures are identified, the outer loop formulates targeted follow-up research commands. It forces the inner loop to reactivate. But this time, the inner loop is armed only with precise instructions to locate the exact data needed to resolve the failed constraints. This dual loop cycle repeats recursively, bouncing between drafting and auditing until every single constraint of the original prompt is met. This nested architecture turns the computationally expensive task of discovering a perfect answer into a series of targeted, constraint-wise corrections. However, recursive execution encounters a practical limit: the context window. Operating indefinitely requires reading the entire past state. Eventually, the model's memory fills with a backlog of search queries, dead ends, and interaction noise. As the interaction history expands, the agent can lose track of its primary objective, crowded out by its previous attempts. AREX solves this with an autonomous context update tool. Instead of relying on an external model to summarize the text, AREX learns to compress its own history on the fly. It discards the noise and distills the session down to a compact improvement state containing only verified evidence and unresolved constraints. By removing these dead ends, the agent maintains focus, allowing it to sustain recursive loops over long time horizons. True autonomy requires the intelligence to know which parts of its history are no longer useful. Inducing these self-directed behaviors requires a specialized training pipeline. The researchers used a two-stage process: agentic mid-training, followed by long-horizon reinforcement learning. The primary hurdle in reinforcement learning over long tasks is sparse final rewards. When an agent takes hundreds of steps to solve a problem, it is difficult to identify which specific actions actually led to the success signal at the end. To solve this, the AREX pipeline identifies and heavily weights key decision points during training. The system rewards the exact moments where decisive evidence is acquired, or where the model identifies an erroneous research direction and terminates it. This training approach establishes the algorithmic discipline visible in the benchmark data. Across evaluations like BrowseComp, WideSearch, and Humanity's Last Exam, the recursive architecture outperforms comparable standard models in both reasoning and tool use metrics. Notably, the 4 billion parameter version of AREX remains competitive with models utilizing significantly more parameters. By pairing rigorous training with continuous self-auditing loops, the smaller model demonstrates how mechanical persistence can compensate for raw scale. Treating an AI like a generator for a single-shot inference is often insufficient for deep research tasks. The final output of AREX is better viewed as a solid artifact, a structure that is stressed and audited until the logic holds firm. Every constraint of the user's prompt is locked into place, cross-referenced by the agent's internal loops. This indicates that AI capability is not solely a function of scaling up compute clusters. A 4 billion parameter model executing targeted recursive self-improvement proves that architectural strategy can yield results previously associated with much larger models. Efficiency is found in the reliability of the loops, not just the size of the weights. If an agent can compress its own state and run these verification cycles indefinitely, the upper limit on its research capability has yet to be determined. The development of AREX marks a shift towards agents that do not just generate answers, but autonomously verify them.